900 years ago, a noble ideal flamed in the hearts of a small group of men and women in a distant land, in the middle of conflict and war. They sought to bring hope and comfort to the sick and the poor, and to defend their faith. Their example stirred others from all nations to join their ranks. Over the centuries, they would be hailed as heroes and despised as fanatics. At times, they would fall victim to war, politics, and even their own humanity, and their light would waver. But in the end, their example would forge a commitment in the hearts of their followers that would endure the test of time and establish forever the name of the Knights of St. John. A 1,000 years ago, Christians, Jews, and Muslims mingled in the sacred city of Jerusalem. By custom and agreement, they respected each other's faith and shared the holy sites. The world east of the Mediterranean Sea was about to explode in a conflict for land and power that would continue for centuries. Muslim Turks were sweeping out of Asia, threatening everything from Arab North Africa to the Aegean Sea. It was the beginning of a struggle between Arabs, Turks, and even the Mongol hordes for control of the Islamic world, and the winds of war were rising. Fearful of the future, the Orthodox Christian Church of Constantinople, being the closest to the conflict, looked to Europe for help. For many years, the rising power of the Muslim Turks had threatened the pilgrimage routes to the Holy Land. And so, the First Crusade was born. The response was more than the Pope or Constantinople could have hoped for. In 1095, tens of thousands of men across Europe took the cross, dedicating their swords and their lives to the liberation of the Holy Land. They headed for the ancient land of Palestine, where in 1099 they captured their goal, Jerusalem. But within its walls, they discovered an oasis of peace that amazed them: the Hospital of St. John the Baptist. The date of its founding is uncertain, and no one knows who built it, although the merchants of Amalfi, Italy, are often credited. It was led by one brother Gerard, and it served the sick and poor, regardless of their race or their faith. Wounded crusaders found healing here, and later showered the hospital with donations of gratitude. Gerard used his good fortune to endow places of rest and shelter, called hospices, along the long, tortuous routes to the Holy Land. And he may even have hired armed knights to protect defenseless pilgrims en route. By 1113, the men of St. John and the women of their sister hospital, St. Mary Magdalene, were recognized by Rome as an exempt religious order, with Gerard as their leader or master. This meant they answered to no one except the Pope and their own conscience. That independence would come to define the very order of the Knights of St. John, and would, some say, determine the future of Europe. Though Gerard was its founder, his successor, Raymond du Puy, was to shape the order into what would become a legend in the Holy Land and throughout Europe. Raymond, like Gerard, is honored among the blessed of the order. Early on, he officially adopted the 8-pointed cross of Amalfi, which had appeared among the first hospitallers of St. John. It would later become known as the Maltese cross, thanks to the knights who wore it then, as now, on the formal black robe of the hospitallers. But more importantly, to the order's first rule of service to the sick and poor, he added a second, defense of the faith. And under his long rule as Grand Master, the order's focus began to shift to its military members. And the Knights of St. John began to take a much more active role in the Crusades. Men flocked to this new order and its unique idea, a way to serve God in a religious community without removing themselves from the world. The religious brothers of the order were true clerics and lay brothers, but the Knights of St. John were not so much fighting monks as soldiers who had taken solemn vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. The order quickly became essential to the Crusader efforts. Soon the Knights were assigned to hold strategic positions along the narrow 500-mile seacoast kingdom that the Crusaders had established. Thanks to their exceptional military skill and their knowledge of the enemy, the order would hold at one time or another more than 56 fortresses. The Knights would also be responsible for thousands of people who flocked to live and work within the shadow of these massive castles. The Hospitallers were growing in Europe as well. Gifts of land, castles, and income poured in, essential to maintain their military work and to maintain the quality of the Hospital of St. John in Jerusalem. It had grown to massive proportions and must have looked even more impressive than later hospitals built by the order, like this one that still exists on the island of Malta. The Hospitallers' reputation grew, both as healers and as one of the most formidable fighting forces in history. The finest warriors of their age, skilled and valiant in battle. To some they were a sign of hope, and to others a dreaded enemy. Where there was battle in the Holy Land, there would be Hospitaller Knights. The Hospitallers were also one of the most hated adversaries of the Saracen army. Among Crusaders, the average fighting man who was captured could expect slavery, while nobles were often ransomed for vast sums. But the Hospitallers, like the Templars, could expect no such mercy. In 1187, Saladin, famed for his chivalry and justice, nevertheless revealed just how great the Saracen hatred was. Surveying his prisoners after the Battle of Hattin, the Sultan spotted the telltale white-on-red battle cross of the order and had every one of the now unarmed Knights of St. John slaughtered on the spot. Yet when he took Jerusalem in 1187, Saladin allowed the hospital to continue to operate and made treaties to allow pilgrims safe passage. There were moments of true chivalry, and often it was the Knights of St. John who exemplified it best. The Crusaders attempted to recover what they had lost, but Europe was growing weary of the cost in men and gold and blood, and hope of victory was fading as the various elements of the Muslim Empire tightened their hold inexorably around the eastern Mediterranean Sea. Finally, the Crusaders found themselves with their backs to the sea, literally. Of the great Crusader strongholds, only Acre remained. Even it had changed hands many times over the long years of crusading. So important were the Knights of St. John in the history of that city that it was known as St. John d'Acre. When it finally fell for the last time to the Muslim Baybars in 1291, it was at a terrible cost to the Crusaders and to the Knights themselves. 60,000 Christians were reported killed, and the Crusaders, including the Knights Hospitallers, were reduced to a shred of their former glory. Only 7 Knights of the Order remained alive to lead their ravaged followers onto ships that would carry them away from the place where their legend had been born. They could not know as they watched the shore recede that this was but the first of many voyages into exile. Yet it was also the doorway to a future filled with even greater fame.